The most humiliating moment of my life wasn't losing a multi-million-dollar deal. It was finding a neatly folded, two-page Thanksgiving seating chart on my mahogany desk, listing 34 people, but not including my name. I'm Elias Vance, but everyone just calls me Eli. I'm 45 years old, and on paper, I am exactly what my family built me to be: the stoic, capable chief operating officer of Vance Holdings, a prestigious New England real estate development firm founded by my grandfather. I'm physically fit, perpetually dressed in a tailored suit, and my daily routine is structured down to the minute. My life is a masterpiece of corporate efficiency, and it's utterly empty. If you are still here, welcome to the Voice of Jenna, where you can hear stories of revenge, betrayal, and family drama. If you want to hear and feel those stories, then subscribe to the channel and enjoy. The setting for this emptiness is the Vance estate, a sprawling, imposing structure of granite and slate nestled in the most exclusive suburb of Boston. It's magnificent, but it feels less like a home and more like a corporate monument. I live here, along with my mother, Victoria, and sometimes my sister, Caroline, when she's between her lavish apartments. We operate under the oppressive, gilded theme of family obligation over personal desire. I picked up the seating chart, the heavy, embossed cardstock cool beneath my fingers. This wasn't just a party plan. It was a physical document outlining my invisible status in my own family. I was supposed to be the host, the man who spent the last 3 weeks balancing the holiday schedule with the acquisition of the new coastal property. But on this diagram, I was simply the unseen mechanic. I walked through the house, the silence amplifying the insult. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving, and the atmosphere, usually charged with my mother's frenetic, high-stakes organization, was eerily calm. The heavy scent of pine and antique wax hung in the air. My daily life revolves around preempting the needs of Vance Holdings. I sit in endless meetings, I review quarterly projections, and I deal with the constant, entitled demands of my sister, Caroline. Caroline, 5 years my junior, manages the firm's PR and internal design. She is beautiful, ruthless, and views the family business, and me, as a vehicle for her own self-aggrandizement. I found her in the enormous, sterile kitchen, supervising the placement of a towering centerpiece. She wore an ivory cashmere sweater and a permanent air of stressed superiority. "Caroline, the seating chart. Why isn't my name on it?" I asked, holding the papers loosely. She barely glanced up, adjusting a silver candelabra with surgical precision. "Oh, Eli, don't be ridiculous. You don't need a seat. You'll be floating, darling. You're the COO. You'll be ensuring the wine cellar is properly accessed, directing the caterers, and pulling Mother away from Uncle Richard before she starts discussing the fourth quarter earnings. You're the logistical support." Her dialogue revealed the brutal reality of my role. I am the foundation, the structure, the support, but never the honored center. My inner thought was a low, aching frustration. I am indispensable, but utterly disposable. "And Mother?" I pressed, wanting to hear the inevitable rationalization from the matriarch's favorite messenger. "Mother is dealing with a real crisis," Caroline huffed, rolling her eyes. "The vintage port delivery from Bordeaux was delayed. She's on the phone with customs. She said you need to reconfirm the parking valet schedule for tomorrow night." Honestly, Eli, you're dwelling on a chart. Victoria Vance, my mother, is the true force behind Vance Holdings. She is a woman who sees love and family only through the lens of business stability and public image. She's 70, impeccably groomed, and her personality is a high-pressure system of expectation. She taught us that personal passions were a weakness, and duty is currency. That was the central theme that had choked the life out of my own dreams. My dream, my secret life, was miles away from property deeds and board meetings. In the dark corners of the estate, tucked beneath a false-bottom drawer in my study, lay my expensive, rarely used camera equipment. I was, at one point, a gifted nature and landscape photographer. The sensory memory of the sharp click of the shutter and the smell of developing fluid was the only thing that felt real. The subtle hint of conflict wasn't just the seating chart. It was the strange, heightened secrecy between Mother and Caroline in the last few weeks. They'd hold hushed, intense conversations in the drawing room, abruptly falling silent when I entered. They had started taking meetings outside of the estate, something unheard of for Victoria, who prefers to conduct all business on her territory. A week ago, I overheard Caroline on the phone with a travel agent, emphatically demanding 6 first-class seats for a tropical destination. I dismissed it as planning for a New Year's trip. Now, looking at the meticulous Thanksgiving plan that completely erased my presence, a nervous tension coiled in my gut. Why would she leave me off the seating chart if my work is so critical? Am I so easily interchangeable? I walked back to my study, the oppressive quiet of the estate following me. I sat down at my massive desk, but instead of reviewing the parking schedule, I opened the false drawer. I touched the cool, heavy metal of my camera body. The truth was, I hadn't taken a meaningful photograph in 5 years, not since Mother casually remarked that my last gallery show looked very nice. But really, Eli, we pay you to manage assets, not to chase sunsets. That memory, that moment of dismissal, cemented my sacrifice. I had buried my passion under layers of financial reports and obligation. But the seating chart, the physical, undeniable evidence of my role as staff, triggered a sudden, cold fury. It foreshadowed a challenge far greater than an awkward conversation about parking valets. It felt like a deliberate exclusion. I didn't know what they were planning. I didn't know why they needed 6 first-class tickets when only 3 of us live here, or why my name was omitted from the centerpiece of our family ritual. But I knew one thing. If I didn't change the trajectory of my life soon, I would be nothing more than the chief operating officer of my own gilded prison, forever supporting a life I didn't get to live. The rising action had begun, silently, in the sterile elegance of the Vance estate, and I had a terrible feeling that the climax would arrive not in a boardroom, but in utter solitude. The most noticeable sign that something was desperately wrong was the silence. On the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, the Vance estate was normally a whirlwind of expensive chaos, florists arguing over lighting, caterers receiving urgent instructions, and my mother's voice, sharp and omnipresent, directing the entire symphony. But today, there was just the faint, clinical hiss of the furnace and the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the main hall. It was the sound of an immense machine running idle. It was eerie, and for me, Elias Vance, whose comfort came only from predictable patterns, it was unsettling. I spent the morning running the usual pre-holiday triage for Vance Holdings. I signed off on 3 major contracts and spent an hour on a call with legal counsel regarding the coastal property acquisition. This was my normal life, absorbing stress and ensuring stability, all while sitting in my office overlooking the estate's dormant grounds. My character trait, meticulous organization, had always been my strength, and now it was my curse. I couldn't focus on the contracts because my mind kept cycling back to the missing seating chart slot and the silence. I finally found my mother, Victoria, not in her usual command center, but in the conservatory, meticulously pruning an orchid. This was another subtle, alarming shift. Victoria doesn't tend plants, she tends assets. Mother, I began, folding myself onto a wicker chair, trying to match her calm, distant energy. The parking valets need the final numbers by 5 this evening. And I've noticed the main china hasn't been brought out yet. She snipped a dead leaf with a quiet snip, not looking up. The air in the conservatory was thick with the humid, sweet scent of the exotic blooms, a sharp contrast to the cold air outside. I handled it, Eli, she said, her voice smooth, almost detached. The usual staff is fully informed. Don't worry about the minutiae. You need to focus on the merger details. The merger isn't until next quarter, I reminded her gently. She finally met my eyes. They were clear, blue, and utterly devoid of the usual high-octane anxiety that defined her. This unnerved me most of all. Just focus on stability, dear. That's your role. Internal thought, my role. My sole, defining, unshakable purpose is to be the anchor while they sail. This was the subtle tension in our relationship. She was dismissing my labor, the one thing that defined my worth to the family. My dedication to the business was the unspoken contract of my life, the currency I exchanged for their acceptance. By trivializing my organizing, she was trivializing my entire contribution to the holiday. Later that afternoon, the tension escalated when I ran into Caroline, who was rushing down the main staircase with an expensive leather duffel bag. "Leaving early, Caro?" I asked, leaning against the banister. "Just meeting friends for a short ski weekend," she replied quickly, avoiding eye contact. She smelled faintly of chlorine and high-altitude luxury. Her character flaw, entitlement and evasion, was shining brightly. "I told Mother I'd be back late Wednesday night. You'll handle the last-minute crisis if the wine delivery is delayed, won't you?" "Of course," I replied automatically, but my mind was clicking. 6 first-class tickets. Meeting friends for a short ski weekend. The timeline didn't compute. Caroline is physically incapable of packing for a ski trip in a single duffel bag. "Caroline," I said, my voice dropping, "did you remember the seating chart? I thought 34 guests were confirmed." She paused, fiddling with the gold clasp on her bag. "Oh, there might be a few less. Mother called a few people back. The guest list is always fluid, Eli. Just trust that Mother has everything under control." She was too dismissive, too quick to leave. This confirmed the foreshadowing. Something was being actively hidden from me. After she sped away in her car, I retreated to my study. I didn't open a financial report. I opened the false bottom drawer and pulled out my old Nikon D850. The cool, familiar weight of the camera body grounded me instantly. The sight of the unused lens caps and the scent of the clean case evoked the theme reinforcement. My pursuit of beauty and truth through a lens, a passion I had suppressed for the family's expectations of corporate duty. Getty Images. I sat there, running my thumb over the settings dial, remembering the vast, wild coastlines I used to capture. That was where my spirit lived, not in these sterile rooms. The final, decisive interaction came that evening. Victoria returned, holding a crisp, navy blue folder, a type of folder often used for closing real estate deals. She was unusually affectionate, giving me a quick, dry kiss on the cheek, a rarity that always made me suspicious. "Eli, thank you for being so reliable. Everything is under control," she said, handing me the folder. "What's this?" "It's just the final paperwork on the acquisition. A few signatures are required. It's urgent, so I left it for you. You are the COO, after all." I opened the folder. It was dense with contracts, but tucked right in the middle was a standard form for leave of absence and emergency contact delegation. It was pre-signed by Victoria, delegating all executive authority for the next 10 days to the VP of Acquisitions and requesting my emergency contact information. She was preparing for a sudden, extended absence, and she was doing it under the guise of urgent work. "Mother, why the leave of absence form? Is someone ill?" She sighed, a practiced sound of maternal exhaustion. "Eli, please. Just sign it. I have a tiny, last-minute business trip that simply cannot be postponed. It's related to the acquisition. I need a clear chain of command." "A business trip that requires a 10-day leave over Thanksgiving?" I countered, my voice laced with the suspicion I could no longer hide. "And why did Caroline just leave for a ski trip if she's expected back for the big dinner?" Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a cold, impenetrable mask. "You worry too much, dear. It's Thanksgiving. Just be grateful for your security. And sign the papers. You know how much I rely on you." That single line, "just be grateful for your security," was the ultimate put-down and the ultimate foreshadowing. She was treating my life and my position as a gift she could revoke. I looked down at the form. My hand hesitated. Signing it meant accepting my role as the left-behind guardian of the fortress while the family went somewhere. I signed the documents, the pen scratching heavily across the expensive paper, reinforcing my compliance one last time. But as I handed the navy folder back, a sudden realization sparked. The quiet, the duffel bag, the evasiveness, the seating chart. This wasn't a business trip. This was a strategic abandonment. I had a terrible premonition that my quiet Thanksgiving was about to be the loudest wake-up call of my life. The main conflict had always existed, a quiet, structural fault line beneath the impeccable facade of the Vance estate. It wasn't about property boundaries or quarterly earnings. It was the raw, existential clash between my obligation to the family and my right to a self-defined life. The initial clash wasn't a heated argument. It was the sudden, total withdrawal of the antagonist, the family unit itself. I woke up the next morning, Wednesday, 2 days before Thanksgiving, to a profound, unsettling silence. I was alone in the entire east wing of the estate. I walked into the main hall, the massive space usually filled with the anticipation of the holidays, and found it empty. The crystal chandelier, which usually burned with ostentatious light, was dark. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic whoosh of the pool filtration system outside. I checked the garage. Both my mother Victoria's custom sedan and Caroline's flashy sports car were gone. The 3 massive Suburbans reserved for hauling guests and luggage were also absent. The staff quarters, usually teeming with early morning activity, were quiet. It was like an entire world had simply ceased to exist. A surge of cold, analytical dread hit me. This wasn't a sudden emergency. This was a calculated, synchronized disappearance. My internal narrative immediately went into protective overdrive. Someone is ill. A serious, private family matter has happened, and they chose not to burden the COO with the emotional fallout. But the sight of the untouched, elaborately laid tables in the dining room, complete with fresh, if slightly drooping, floral arrangements, shattered that flimsy excuse. I walked to the kitchen, the heart of the estate, where I found the only evidence of their departure. A pristine white envelope, sealed with a gold V crest, sitting precisely in the center of the massive granite countertop. I snatched the envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, frantic rhythm that finally broke the oppressive silence. The paper was heavy, expensive. I ripped it open. The letter inside was written on Victoria's personal stationery, signed in her sharp, uncompromising script. The dialogue was shockingly brief and brutally efficient. Eli, a critical, short-notice business matter related to the coastal property acquisition required us to leave immediately. The timing is regrettable, but unavoidable. Caroline and I had to fly out, along with a few key associates. We've instructed the caterers to cancel their services. Please inform the valet company and the florist that their services are no longer required for the Thanksgiving dinner. Consider this your unexpected vacation time. We will be in touch when we return. Victoria. I read the short paragraph 3 times. A critical business matter. Required us to leave immediately. We will be in touch when we return. The main conflict was now undeniably clear. The deliberate, strategic abandonment by my entire immediate family, disguised as a corporate necessity. This conflict immediately and brutally disrupted my life. Not only was the most important social event of the year, the event I had spent weeks preparing, canceled, but I was completely isolated. The emotional depth of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't the cancellation that hurt. It was the deceit and the sheer effort they put into maintaining the lie right up until the moment of departure. They had lied about Caroline's ski trip. They had fabricated a late-night business emergency, and my mother had used the leave of absence form to ensure I remained on the estate, handling logistics and unaware of their true plans. I was the fool left holding the keys to an empty fortress. I threw the letter onto the granite, the sound of the thick paper striking the stone a weak echo of the rage bubbling up inside me. Internal narrative. They chose to lie instead of simply telling me they wanted a quiet holiday, or even that they didn't want me to come. Why the theatrical deception? It confirms that they view me not as a son or a brother, but as a resource whose only utility is here, ensuring the estate doesn't burn down while they're gone. The seeds of climax and rising tension were immediately sown in my decision to find out the truth. My rational, COO mind, fueled by years of financial detective work, kicked in. The lie about the business matter was too flimsy, too poorly executed for Victoria. I rushed to my mother's small, private office, which rarely locked. Everything was exactly as she left it, pristine, organized, but eerily devoid of personal clutter. I didn't find any travel itineraries or flight plans. I found only a small, subtle anomaly. The official, embossed folder for the coastal property acquisition that I had signed yesterday was gone, replaced by an identical, empty folder. The document I signed yesterday, the leave of absence form, was tied to a real business acquisition. Was this trip secretly tied to the deal, or was the timing a convenient cover? I used my access to the company database and quickly ran a search on all recent, high-value corporate travel booked by anyone in Vance Holdings. Nothing showed up for Victoria or Caroline under corporate accounts. They had booked this trip privately, which means it wasn't a business matter at all. This initial clash didn't involve shouting. It involved the terrifying realization that the people I had dedicated my entire adult life to were capable of this level of cold, strategic cruelty. I walked back into the silent main hall. The setting, the beautiful, opulent estate, now reflected my emotional tone perfectly, a gilded cage, polished and empty. The sheer luxury of the space emphasized my isolation. It felt like a stage, all the props meticulously set for a play that would never be performed. My hands clenched into fists. This was no longer about a missed holiday. This was a direct, personal betrayal that challenged the very core of my identity. The theme of self-identity versus obligation was starkly defined. For years, I had believed I was indispensable. Now I realized I was just disposable. I knew I wouldn't just sit here and wait. My internal dialogue shifted from hurt to unyielding resolve. They want me to be the reliable, compliant COO who handles the cancellation and waits patiently. I will not give them that. I went to my study, pulled out my old camera case, and sat down. I wasn't leaving the estate, but I was about to break their rules. The immediate, necessary action was to find out where they went, and more importantly, why. The seeds of the climax were watered. The truth would be exposed, and I would use it to redefine my relationship with the Vance legacy forever. The initial shock of the empty house gave way to a churning, frantic energy. I had the deceit, the cancellation of Thanksgiving, the fabricated business trip, but I didn't have the destination. My struggle was immediate and urgent. I had to pierce their wall of secrecy before they returned, fully prepared with their practiced lies. I spent Thursday, what should have been Thanksgiving Eve, like a frantic detective in my own life. The Vance estate, with its vast, echoing rooms, felt like a silent accuser. I went through Mother's office again, looking for any physical travel itinerary, but Victoria was too meticulous. Her only paper trail led back to the fake coastal property folder. My internal thoughts were a chaotic battle between my professional training and my raw, wounded heart. The COO is focused on solutions. The son is focused on betrayal. The conflict escalated, becoming intensely personal because their actions confirmed my greatest fear. My emotional value was zero. I was merely an automated security system they left running while they went on holiday. I realized the only way to track them was through the channels they themselves prioritize: image and vanity. I logged into the corporate accounts, not for business, but for personal vengeance. My sister, Caroline, is pathologically obsessed with her public image, using social media as a constant broadcast of her curated perfection. Although she never allowed me to be her friend on personal platforms, claiming my presence would cramp her style, I had administrative access to all company-linked cloud storage, including backups of devices they occasionally used for Vance Holdings events. I accessed the photo gallery backup from the old tablet Caroline used for logging PR contacts. I scrolled through mundane photos of charity galas and staged office shots, the bright screens flashing in the otherwise dark study. The only sound the aggressive were of the computer fan. Then there it was. Not a direct photo of them, but a subtle, unmistakable clue, a close-up photo Caroline had taken of a cocktail menu. The top was embossed with a stylized logo of a palm tree and a distinct name, the Mauna Lani Sky Lounge. The plot complication had arrived, delivered by my sister's vanity. Mauna Lani. That was in Hawaii. Not a short ski weekend. Not a crucial business acquisition. I immediately cross-referenced the photo's metadata. Timestamp: 11 hours ago. They had been gone since early yesterday morning. The reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just left, they were halfway across the world, celebrating the start of the holiday week while I was here, dutifully canceling the caterers and checking on the septic system. My emotional stakes deepened into a scalding, cold rage. But the true, stunning betrayal was yet to come. I opened up my private social media account, the one I used only to follow photography journals, and searched for Mauna Lani. I didn't have to scroll far. There was Caroline's public-facing account, and the photo had just been posted minutes ago. The caption read, "Paradise found. Trading the New England chill for the Hawaiian heat. So grateful for this much-needed family time. Happy Thanksgiving Eve. Hibiscus." The accompanying photo was a high-resolution, perfectly filtered selfie. My mother, Victoria, was smiling, something she rarely did outside of earnings season reports. She was wearing a massive sun hat, flanked by Caroline and two other corporate associates, the key personnel she mentioned in her note. They were standing on a pristine beach, the turquoise ocean stretching endlessly behind them. The humiliation was total. It wasn't just that they lied, it was that they broadcast the truth online, knowing I would see it, yet clearly not caring about the consequences to me. The very image they curated for public consumption, the grateful, close family, was the weapon they used to wound me personally. I stood up, knocking my expensive chair back with a crash that echoed through the silent, oppressive study. My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. The rising action was no longer internal, it was a physical need for justice. My inner thoughts were the business was the cover, but the image is the truth. They needed to project family unity to the world, but they didn't need me to be part of the actual family experience. I was the inconvenient truth, the one they couldn't risk bringing along because my very presence would remind them of the reality they were escaping, the suffocating obligation of the estate. My greatest obstacle now was my own ingrained loyalty. Years of obedience fought against the urge to destroy everything. I picked up the phone, intending to call the firm's legal counsel and expose the massive, unapproved leave of absence. But the voice of my grandfather, the founder of Vance Holdings, seemed to whisper in my ear, "A thorn never risks the name, Elias." This conflict reinforced the theme. My self-worth had been completely tied to maintaining the Vance name. To publicly expose their lie meant risking a scandal that could harm the company, the very thing I was hired to protect. I slumped back down, unable to make the call. Not yet. I had to choose. Protect the corporation, my obligation, or protect myself, my identity. The foreshadowing climax arrived with a clear, cold decision. I wouldn't call the lawyers yet. That was a corporate solution. I needed a personal retaliation, a move that would hit them where their true loyalty lay, their assets. I realized what I needed to do. I didn't need to destroy the company. I needed to reclaim my own life, and I would start by reclaiming the assets they valued most. My old camera, the one I had buried beneath contracts, suddenly felt like the only tool that mattered. I had been a capable COO, but I was a brilliant photographer. I was going to use the remainder of this stolen holiday to expose the beauty they ignored and build a new future that they could never control. This was my personal declaration of war. The emptiness of the Vance estate on Thanksgiving Day was a physical weight, but it was also a revelation. The main conflict, my family's abandonment, had birthed two crucial subplots that would define the rest of my story, the financial blueprint and the artistic rebirth. I spent the day not grieving, but dissecting. I settled into the quiet, sun-drenched library, a space Victoria usually kept locked for serious client meetings. The scent of aged leather and dust jacket glue filled the air. This space, a forgotten corner of the house, became my war room. My first action was to access the files related to the coastal property acquisition, the supposed critical business matter my mother used as a cover. I found the original development proposal which I had helped draft 6 months ago. The project, titled Horizon Shores, was immense, a luxury resort and residential complex designed to stabilize Vance Holdings' finances for the next decade. I realized the Hawaii trip wasn't just a vacation, it was the closing of the deal. Victoria and Caroline had flown out with the key associates to finalize the contract signings in a high-profile, tropical environment, likely leveraging the stunning location for a press release or a signing bonus. They had deliberately left me behind to run interference and manage the cancellation of the holiday, ensuring I couldn't interfere with their high-stakes social performance. But as I reviewed the final terms, a crucial plot complication emerged. Tucked into the supplementary clauses were several high-risk loan covenants that made my COO instinct scream. These loans carried unusually steep penalties for delayed milestones and included a massive, non-refundable deposit. I ran the numbers quickly. If the first phase of Horizon Shores wasn't completed exactly on time, the penalties would not only erase the profits, but could potentially trigger a debt spiral that would require them to sell off other Vance assets. They didn't leave me because I was inconvenient. They left me because they were taking an enormous, reckless gamble, and they knew my conservative financial nature would forbid it. They sacrificed stability for immediate, massive payoff. This wasn't about business. It was about greed disguised as legacy. This subplot created additional tension. My return to the company wouldn't be a simple matter of reassuming my post. I would be walking into a financial powder keg lit by my mother and sister, forcing me to either save them from their own catastrophic decisions or let the whole structure collapse, the ultimate rising stake. The second, far more personally vital subplot was my reconnection with my true identity. I pulled my photography equipment out of the study and set up a temporary darkroom in the estate's rarely used laundry room. The emotional resonance of holding the camera again was overwhelming. It felt like reconnecting with a best friend I had cruelly abandoned. My passion had always been capturing the tension between the natural world and rigid human structures. My first subject, ironically, was the Vance estate itself. I spent hours roaming the deserted property, capturing the beauty and the imprisonment of the place. I focused on the intricate iron gates, the cold symmetry of the topiary garden, and the reflection of the iron fences in the dark pool water. I was shooting a visual memoir of my gilded cage. I called Marcus Chun, a celebrated nature photographer who had run the gallery where I showed my work a decade ago. Marcus had a blunt personality and had always challenged my decision to abandon art for the corporate world. Eli? I thought you were busy counting million-dollar doors. Marcus's dialogue was instantly cutting, reflecting our past conflict. I'm busy counting the cost of my life, Marcus. I found my camera. I admit it, the statement feeling like a confession. I told him a stripped-down version of the abandonment, focusing on the emotional reality rather than the Hawaiian details. Marcus didn't offer sympathy. He offered a challenge, the perfect influence to fuel my character arc. They abandoned the COO, Eli. They didn't abandon the artist. Send me 5 photos.
Right now.
I want to see if the COO killed the talent, or if the artist just went into hiding. His request for 5 photos became my immediate therapeutic task. I spent the rest of Thanksgiving Day composing, editing, and printing, the smell of toner and paper replacing the scent of pine. The foreshadowing climax wasn't the inevitable confrontation with Victoria. It was the moment I would finally show her that I had built an independent value she could not control or co-opt. As I was packing my photographs to send to Marcus, I checked Caroline's social media one last time. She had posted a new carousel of photos, staged professional shots of her and Victoria, wearing matching white linen, signing massive documents on a shaded terrace. The caption was aggressive and self-congratulatory. Huge thank you to the team making the biggest deal in Vance Holdings history happen this week. When you're the best, you work through the holidays. Hashtag Horizon Shores, hashtag Legacy Builders. The plot twist was the image itself. In the background of one photo, reflected faintly in the polished glass of a boardroom door, I saw not just the associates, but a figure I recognized instantly. Avery Sinclair, the owner of the rival firm, Sinclair Development, a man known for hostile takeovers and aggressive financial engineering. This wasn't just a reckless gamble, it was an incredibly risky partnership. Victoria and Caroline had tied the fate of Vance Holdings to a financial predator, believing they could control him for the sake of immediate profit. They were so desperate for the capital infusion that they risked the entire Vance legacy. My internal resolve hardened. The theme was screaming at me. My sacrifice wasn't holding the family together, it was holding back the inevitable consequence of their greed. I was no longer interested in saving the company for them. I was interested in saving my own contribution, my own dignity, and extracting my share before they brought the whole thing down. The artist and the architect were now aligned. I would use my business acumen to secure my financial separation and my artistic passion to define my new self. The stage for the ultimate confrontation was being set, a battle not for money, but for self-determination. My flight from analysis to action was supposed to be seamless. I had the proof of their deceit, the Hawaii location, the motive, the risky Horizon Shores deal with Sinclair, and the leverage, my COO knowledge. I spent the rest of the holiday weekend compiling a meticulous separation package, my contribution to Vance Holdings, my calculated value, and the legal framework for my departure. The failure didn't come from Victoria or Caroline. It came from the silence of my only trusted confidant outside the business, the one person whose judgment I relied on, Marcus Chin. I had sent Marcus the 5 photographs of the estate, the cold symmetry of the manor, the isolation of the gates, a visual plea for validation of my forgotten talent. I waited 2 full days for his reply, the suspense amplifying the challenge. I needed his affirmation to cement my decision to leave the gilded cage. I needed the artist to validate the escape of the COO. When his email finally arrived late Sunday night, the subject line was simply, "Call me." I called him instantly, pacing the enormous, empty study, the polished silence of the estate amplifying my nervousness. "Marcus, what did you think?" "Be brutal," I prompted, trying to sound professional, but my voice betrayed the raw, deep insecurity I felt about my art. His response was the serious failure, the devastating setback that pierced my emotional defense. His dialogue was slow, heavy, and brutally honest. "Eli, they're technically perfect. The composition is flawless. The lighting is controlled. The print quality is superb. You always were technically brilliant." He paused, the silence stretching into an abyss. "But they're dead, Eli. They're cold. There's no hunger in them. They look like the work of an architect, not an artist." The impact of this setback was immediate and crippling. My emotional and psychological depth plummeted. I felt a wave of crushing despair, worse than the betrayal of the Thanksgiving trip. They had lied about the business. Marcus was telling me I had lied to myself about my passion. Inner dialogue reflecting turmoil. Did the COO kill the artist? Did 10 years of spreadsheets and corporate rigidity drain all the passion out of me? If I leave the business, what am I leaving for? I have sacrificed my life for the company, and now, even the thing I sacrificed it for might be gone. The theme of self-identity felt like a cruel joke. The antagonist's cunning had a secondary effect. By trapping me in the estate, Victoria hadn't just stifled my life, she had stifled my soul. The tension heightened the next morning. Victoria and Caroline landed at the private terminal early Monday morning, looking refreshed, tanned, and terrifyingly victorious. They walked into the estate as if they had just returned from a harmless business luncheon, completely ignoring the massive betrayal. The initial, chilling confrontation was with my mother. "Eli, you're here." "Excellent," Victoria said, handing her travel garment bag to the housekeeper. She didn't ask how my unexpected vacation went. She didn't apologize for the lie. She simply assumed my compliance. "The coastal property deal is closed, and it was a masterpiece of leverage," she continued, already moving toward her office. "We have massive capital infusion. The company is poised for 10 years of growth. You handled the cancellations well. Now, I need you to focus on the next quarter's projections." "You lied to me, Mother," I stated, my voice low and dangerous. "You canceled Thanksgiving and flew across the world for a deal you knew I would oppose. You put the entire Vance legacy at risk with high-interest loans and a partnership with a known financial predator, Sinclair. And you lied to me about it." Victoria stopped, turning slowly. The sun streaming through the main window caught the cold glitter in her eyes. Her strength and cunning lay in her absolute refusal to acknowledge fault. "Lied, Eli?" I managed assets. This wasn't a holiday. It was a high-stakes negotiation that required complete discretion. You are too risk-averse. You would have stalled the deal. I made a difficult decision that secured the family's future. That is the difference between an owner and a COO. Her dialogue was a verbal dagger, reinforcing the power dynamic. I was the hired help, easily circumvented. Caroline sauntered in, sipping a green juice. Her only contribution was a casual, cruel dismissal. "Oh, please, Eli. Get over it. You were busy with the caterers anyway. We sent you a postcard." The challenge was immense. Not only had my artistic identity been questioned, but my professional power had been instantly undermined by Victoria's success. I couldn't accuse her of recklessness now. She had just secured the biggest deal in the firm's history. The plot complication was that her betrayal was a financial success, making my protests sound like sour grapes. The only way out was to execute my legal strategy immediately, but now it was fraught with emotional complication. My inner turmoil was relentless. Do I leave the business that defines my security for a passion that Marcus says is dead? That evening, I returned to my study and pulled out the legal separation package. I still intended to leave, but my motivation had changed. It wasn't about running to art. It was about running from them and ensuring my financial freedom was absolute before their risky deal collapsed. I called my personal attorney, a supporting character who had handled my grandfather's estate, Richard Cole. "Richard, I need you to draw up papers. I am formally resigning from Vance Holdings and liquidating my entire stake in the company," I instructed, the heavy words a final, irrevocable decision. "Eli, this is abrupt. Are you sure?" "That stake is 25% of the company," Richard questioned. "I am certain. And here's the complication, Richard. Due to a clause in the original partnership agreement, if I resign after securing a major acquisition, I am due a significant final bonus payment, a calculation of my tenure, and the projected 10-year yield of the Horizon Shores project. I want the maximum payout. And I want the calculation to be based on Victoria's wildly optimistic growth projections." This was my revised strategy. Since they valued the business over me, I would use the business's success as the mechanism for my escape. I would not publicly expose them, but I would extract the highest financial price for my silence and my freedom. The rising action now pointed directly toward the climax, the inevitable board meeting where I would resign, cash out, and walk away with a fortune large enough to pursue my dead passion until I found the hunger again. The resignation would be my final, absolute act of self-definition. The fear of being empty was still there, but it was eclipsed by the terrifying knowledge that staying meant being slowly erased. The Monday after my family's return felt like the quiet before a financial hurricane. I had delivered my ultimatum to my lawyer, Richard Cole: maximum payout, minimum negotiation. I spent the next 48 hours in a holding pattern, waiting for Richard to prepare the formal resignation and the complex bonus calculation tied to the Horizon Shores deal. This was my strategic preparation, the calculus of my freedom. I found myself drifting through the Vance estate, noticing the sensory-rich descriptions of my surroundings that I had always ignored. The scent of ozone and clean power from the server room, the faint echo of water moving through the heating pipes, these were the things I had prioritized over the smell of salt air and developing chemicals. This time of reflection was critical for my character arc development. The sting of Marcus's critique, that my art was dead, still lingered, but it was countered by a profound realization. I didn't need external validation to pursue my passion. The failure wasn't that I was a bad artist. The failure was that I stopped trying. I stood in the vast, empty kitchen, the space that symbolized my perpetual servitude, the place where I managed caterers and seating charts. I leaned against the cold granite counter, the stone a familiar contrast to the warmth of my memory. Flashback. I was 22, freshly graduated, and had just sold my first professional landscape photograph for a modest sum. I used that money to buy a rugged used Jeep for a 6-month road trip across the western United States. That summer was the last time I felt entirely unburdened. I remember a specific evening in Utah. I had hiked 10 miles into the desert, waiting for the perfect light. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the sky wasn't just red. It was a violent, pulsing spectrum of magenta and gold, illuminating the canyon walls with impossible clarity. I wasn't just taking the picture. I was living the moment, my heart beating with delight. When I returned, my father, a kinder, but equally business-obsessed version of Victoria, told me, "The photos are beautiful, Elias. But the real picture is in the boardroom. That's where you secure the future." I had shelved the Jeep keys and the camera, trading the unpredictable beauty of the sunset for the safe, predictable comfort of the Vance Holdings ledger. That was the moment I cemented the theme. I chose the obligation of security over the risk of self-discovery. Now, 2 decades later, the emotional depth of that choice was staggering. My internal growth stemmed from accepting the cold, hard truth. Victoria and Caroline hadn't ruined my life. They had simply leveraged the choices I willingly made. The betrayal was just the catalyst. I picked up my camera, now loaded with film, and walked to the high, arched window of the hall. I didn't shoot a formal composition. I took a quick, dirty shot of the reflection of the chandelier on the highly polished floor, a distorted, glittering image that captured the inherent lie of the estate. The picture was imperfect, but it was honest. The passion isn't dead. It's just buried under layers of compliance. Marcus was right. The art was cold, because I was cold. I was shooting like a CEO protecting assets, not an artist chasing light. Now, the stakes are different. I'm not running from them. I'm running to the chase. My strategy for the final confrontation with Victoria was now refined. It would happen tomorrow, in the board meeting room. It couldn't be a dramatic shouting match. It had to be an efficient, financial demolition. I knew Victoria's character trait. She never shows weakness and always respects financial leverage. My dialogue had to reflect this change in my personality, sharp, technical, and emotionless. I called Richard to confirm the time. "Richard, ensure the calculation for my final bonus is attached to the paperwork. Don't mention the amount until I give the cue. Victoria must see the full resignation first. I want her to believe she's won this first round." "Understood, Eli. We are setting the stage for the maximum impact. The transfer papers are ready. We can liquidate your shares within 48 hours of her signature," Richard confirmed. The theme reinforcement was evident in this plan. I was using the tools of the prison, financial leverage, legal documentation, and strategic timing to purchase my freedom. My final act of preparation was intensely personal. I took the silver-framed photograph of my father from my desk. He had died 5 years ago, still believing I was happy managing the business. "I'm sorry, Dad," I murmured, holding the picture. "I couldn't secure the future the way you wanted, but I'm securing my future. And this time, I'm chasing the sunset, not the ledger." I placed the photo carefully into my camera bag. The foreshadowing final confrontation was set. Tomorrow, in the very room where the Vance legacy was forged, I would execute the final transaction of my corporate life. I would resign, demand my fortune, and walk out of the gilded cage forever. The day of the final confrontation arrived with a cold, clear New England morning. The air outside the Vance estate was sharp, reflecting the precise, unforgiving strategy one had planned. My internal resolve was absolute. The fear of being empty was now utterly eclipsed by the burning clarity of my purpose. My first action of the day wasn't business. It was a private ritual. I walked out to the estate's back garden, where the iron gates stood in cold, intricate symmetry. I pulled out my camera. I didn't frame a perfect landscape. Instead, I took a tight, detailed shot of the gate's lock mechanism. This wasn't for art. It was a physical symbol of my choice. I wasn't waiting for the gate to be opened. I was choosing to walk out and lock the mechanism behind me. My strategy was built on one principle: Victoria must be financially cornered, not emotionally appeased. I would use the leverage of the disastrous Horizon Shores deal against her, forcing her to accept my terms before she could realize the gravity of the risk she had taken. The rising action was now ticking down to 10 a.m., the time of the emergency board meeting. I met my lawyer, Richard Cole, 30 minutes before the meeting at a neutral location. a cafe a block from the Vance Holdings skyscraper. Richard looked nervous, but his supporting character reaction was exactly what I needed. Cautious professionalism. Eli, I've run the numbers 5 times. The contractual clause is solid. Your final bonus payment, based on the Horizon Shore's projected yield, is staggering. It will force them to liquidate significant assets or take out a new, massive loan immediately to cover the expense. My dialogue revealing determination was calm, technical, and void of familial sentiment. Good. That's the point. They gambled the company's stability on a risky deal. I'm simply cashing in my share of that gamble. When they argue, remind them that my resignation is effective immediately, and without my financial oversight, the Horizon Shores project faces immediate regulatory scrutiny and potential disaster. Richard adjusted his tie, accepting the cold logic. You're not just leaving, Eli. You're executing a hostile withdrawal. They force me to choose between my soul and their solvency. I chose my soul, and I'm billing them for the transition. I replied. The true plot advancement toward the climax was my final confrontation with Caroline. I found her in the office kitchen, casually scrolling through her phone, looking annoyed about the unscheduled morning meeting. You're early, Eli. I assume you're running the presentation? She asked, her voice laced with entitlement. I placed my resignation package, a heavy, sealed envelope, on the granite counter beside her. I won't be, Caroline. This is my formal resignation from Vance Holdings, effective immediately, I stated, watching for the shock. Caroline's reaction was not shock, but immediate, condescending scorn. Resignation? Are you having a nervous breakdown? Because Mother warned me you might try to overreact about the holiday. You can't just quit, Eli. We are Vance Holdings. Where would you even go? To take pictures of grass. Her dialogue, mocking my passion, was the final, stinging validation of my decision. I'm resigning, I repeated, my voice steady, and I'm liquidating my 25% share in the company. The legal documentation is attached, and my lawyer will serve Mother with the final financial demands during the meeting. Enjoy the company while it lasts, Caroline. You just lost your logistical support, and you're about to lose a significant portion of your liquid assets. I walked away without waiting for her reply. Her sputtering astonishment was music to my ears. The theme reflected in choices was complete. I had exchanged a guaranteed position of power, COO, for an uncertain future, artist, but I had ensured that future was financially independent of their toxic manipulation. I walked into the boardroom, the setting of countless hours of sacrifice. The massive mahogany table, the framed photos of my grandfather, and the hushed, imposing atmosphere usually felt like home. Today, they felt like props in a play I was finally leaving. Victoria was already seated, surrounded by the 3 major directors. She gave me a cool, practiced look of maternal disappointment. Inner dialogue was like she sees me as a problem to be managed, a loose thread to be neatly tucked away. She doesn't realize I've cut the entire tapestry. This was the peak of my internal resolve. My character growth and arc were fully realized in this moment. I was no longer the compliant son seeking approval. I was a man executing a clean, decisive financial break. Elias, your sister said you were being dramatic about leaving, Victoria began, her voice sharp. We don't have time for tantrums. What exactly is this emergency meeting for? I placed the resignation packet on the table in front of her. It's not an emergency, Mother. It's a resignation. And a settlement. I'm out, and I'm demanding the contractually obligated maximum payout for my tenure and my contribution to the Horizon Shores project. Victoria opened the packet, her face remaining impassive as she scanned the resignation letter. But when she flipped to the final page detailing the massive financial calculation, the climax of my strategy, her composure fractured. Her hand actually trembled, and her eyes, usually cold and steady, flashed with absolute, pure panic. This is blackmail, Elias, she whispered, the raw fear in her voice a complete victory. You can't do this. This payment alone will destabilize the entire company. No, Mother, I countered, sitting down and meeting her gaze, utterly devoid of emotion. This is the price of keeping me silent about the reckless risk you took with Avery Sinclair and the Horizon Shores high-interest loan. You chose your ambition over the company's safety. I'm simply billing you for the cleanup. The atmosphere in the Vance Holdings boardroom was thick with a tension so intense it felt physical, pressing down on the polished mahogany table and trapping the light beneath the massive crystal chandelier. This was the pinnacle of the Gilded Cage theme, a place of calculated power, now the stage for a raw, familial implosion. Victoria's initial shock had instantly transformed into pure, icy fury, the only emotion she allowed herself to display in a business setting. She gripped the page detailing the colossal payout calculation, her knuckles white against the paper. You have never once, in 45 years, done anything this calculated and destructive, Elias, she hissed, her voice cutting through the silence. This is an act of war, not a resignation. Your motive is spite, pure and simple. You are retaliating for a missed holiday. My motive is self-preservation, mother, and the price of my emotional labor, I countered, leaning forward slightly, matching her intensity. My posture, usually compliant, was now rigid with defiance. You see a missed holiday. I see a strategic abandonment designed to keep me from interfering with an utterly reckless financial decision. You and Caroline flew to Hawaii to finalize a partnership with Avery Sinclair, a predatory shark, leveraging the entire Vance legacy on high-risk loans and relying on my stability to mask your instability. The key directors, Mr. Hayes and Ms. Ramirez, veterans of the firm, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were the silent witnesses, and my dialogue was aimed as much at them as at Victoria, revealing the deep, structural tension I was exposing. If you dispute this payout, I continued, my voice steady, I will not only file suit for breach of fiduciary duty, but I will immediately inform the regional press about the unapproved 10-day leave of absence taken by the CEO and the head of PR during a critical acquisition closing. I will expose the fact that Vance Holdings placed its COO, the single most risk-averse executive, in charge of the cancellation, precisely so he couldn't see the final, disastrous terms of the Sinclair deal. This was the high stakes, the destruction of the Vance name, the one asset Victoria valued more than money. The setting, the elegant, conservative boardroom, amplified the drama by framing our fight not as a family dispute, but as a corporate crisis. Victoria slammed the papers onto the table. The sound was a sharp, physical crack that momentarily silenced the room. And what about your duty, Elias? What about the loyalty you owe your father's memory? He built this for us. Her voice rose, betraying a flash of genuine fear. I honor my father by refusing to let you burn his legacy for a quick, reckless profit. I shot back. And my loyalty to you ended the moment I saw your smiling face on a beach in Hawaii, celebrating my intentional isolation. You decided my value was zero, mother. I am merely adjusting the calculation. This staggering sum is the cost of my independence. This was the turning point for my character arc. The compliant son who had buried his passion for 2 decades was gone. I was now Elias Vance, the architect of his own liberation. I felt an intense, liberating catharsis. The anger and the deep wound of betrayal were channeling into strategic execution. Caroline burst into the room, having recovered from her earlier shock, her face streaked with tears and fury, the intense emotional and physical drama spilling over. You're destroying us, Eli. You're taking my life away. You know I need those quarterly dividends. We'll be ruined, she shrieked, grasping the edge of the mahogany table. Victoria's eyes narrowed at Caroline, angry that her daughter was showing weakness, but my response was entirely directed at the core motive of the antagonist. You didn't need the dividends, Caroline, I said, looking her directly in the eye. You needed a facade. You needed me to ensure the machine never broke down so you could endlessly fund your vanity. I am simply dismantling the machine. You will have to build your own value now. The pacing was relentless, driven by the urgency of the financial threat. I noticed the subtle, sensory immersion details, the faint scent of Victoria's expensive, precise perfume, which usually signaled absolute control, now felt like a desperate attempt to mask the panic sweat on her brow. The temperature in the room, usually perfectly regulated, felt suddenly stifling. Mr. Hayes, one of the directors, finally broke the silence, his voice shaky. Victoria, Elias's claims regarding the Horizon Shores risk are valid. The non-refundable deposit alone, if he brings this to the board and the press, the stock will plummet. We have to mitigate the damage immediately. The directors had turned on her. Victoria realized she was isolated. Her strength had been her control. Now, she had lost both the control and the credibility. She looked at me one last time, a terrifying mixture of hatred and grudging respect. You learned how to be ruthless, Elias. I taught you well. No, Mother. I corrected her, a small, final smile touching my lips. You just taught me what to run from. And now I'm running. Victoria slowly picked up a pen, a gold, heavy instrument reserved for signing billions of dollars in deals. The pen trembled as she looked at the bottom of the payout agreement. This was the final, devastating surrender. Richard, she stated, her voice tight with suppressed rage, addressing my lawyer, who had just entered the room, execute the agreement. We will transfer the funds and shares immediately. And Elias, when this is done, you are dead to this family. You will never set foot on the estate again. I plan on it, I affirmed. And Mother, enjoy the Horizon Shores deal. If Sinclair decides to squeeze you on the payment schedule, remember who your best risk manager was. I stood up, pushing my chair back quietly. I didn't wait for the signature. The verbal agreement was enough. I had won the financial war and secured my freedom. The foreshadowing resolution was the knowledge that while I walked away wealthy, they were left with a ticking time bomb, the very deal they sacrificed me for. I walked out of the boardroom and out of my corporate life, leaving the cold, calculating drama behind me for good. The scratch of Victoria's gold pen against the resignation and payout agreement was the final, devastating sound of the main confrontation. It was the definitive clink of the gilded cage door closing, but this time, I was the one locking it from the outside. Victoria didn't look at me as she signed. Her eyes, fixed on the signature line, held a concentration bordering on madness. She was signing away the liquid assets of Vance Holdings, agreeing to pay a settlement so large it would force immediate, painful restructuring, all to prevent the public exposure of her catastrophic gamble with Avery Sinclair. As soon as Victoria pushed the signed document away, Richard Cole stepped forward and took the paper, his face stern. The transaction will be initiated immediately, Victoria. A quarter of Elias's shares will be held in escrow until the total payment is complete, ensuring the timely transfer of funds, Richard stated, his voice a professional counterpoint to the family's raw emotion. As per the confidentiality clause in this settlement, Elias will make no public statements regarding the firm's stability, the nature of the Horizon Shores loans, or the circumstances of his resignation. He will, however, retain all documentation relevant to the Horizon Shores acquisition risks for his own protection. Victoria looked up then, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw the full extent of the consequences. It wasn't just the money, it was the realization that I now held the only real power, the truth, and I had purchased my silence at an exorbitant cost to her. You have always valued the brand over the family, Mother, I said, rising to my feet. My voice was calm, firm, utterly devoid of the desperate pleadings she was used to hearing. I am simply holding up your end of the bargain. I am protecting the Vance name from your own recklessness. Consider this my final, highly compensated act of COO duty. Caroline, sobbing openly now, ran to my side. Eli, please. You can't do this to me. Where will I live? The quarterly dividend pays for my apartment. You can't just walk away. I am simply forcing you to learn what I learned on Thanksgiving, Caroline, I replied, stepping back, so she couldn't touch me. My dialogue reflected change. I wasn't being cruel, I was being definitive. You have to build your own value. Stop relying on the legacy. Your mother created an illusion. I just exposed the cost of maintaining it. The emotional peak and catharsis arrived the moment I walked out of that boardroom. I didn't look back. The tension had broken, replaced by a wave of lightness. The air outside the boardroom, usually crisp and cold, felt like a breath of fresh, clean air. I left the skyscraper, walking away from the towering monument to my family's sacrifice and hypocrisy. I called Richard once I was safely in the taxi. "It's done, Richard. Start the transfer," I instructed. "It's done, Elias. You're free," he confirmed. "I'll handle the rest." The true climax wasn't the signature, it was the drive away from that office. I felt a profound sense of catharsis. The decade of suppressed identity, the silent agony of the past week, all culminating in this powerful, final act of self-definition. I drove straight to the Vance estate. The setting, the scene of my long imprisonment, was where I had to complete my character transformation and growth. I walked through the silent house, not as the custodian, but as a temporary resident. I went to the library, where I had spent Thanksgiving Day researching fraud and staring at the Horizon Shore's risk. I gathered the last of my photography equipment. My reflection was clear. I had traded security for self-worth. I had leveraged my business brilliance, not to save the family that scorned me, but to fund the life I had always wanted. I had proved that the artist in me wasn't dead. He was simply dormant, waiting for the COO to secure the financing for his escape. I paused at the main hall, remembering the chilling silence of Thanksgiving morning. That was the lowest point, the moment I realized I was worthless to them. But now, that emptiness was the very thing that allowed me to rebuild. The grand silence of the estate was now a promise of the quiet, focused work ahead of me. I picked up the key to the estate, the heavy, ornate key that symbolized my perpetual guard duty. I placed it in a small envelope addressed to Victoria, with a single, handwritten note. "I'm taking my own path. Do not contact me until you are ready to discuss our relationship based on mutual respect, not assets." My transformation was complete. I wasn't running to a destination. I was running from a definition. I walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. I didn't get into the car. I walked, feeling the cold, invigorating air on my face, toward the main iron gates. I took one final photograph of the gate from the outside, the light catching the details of the intricate lock mechanism, the resolution captured in a single frame. I had overcome the conflict not by winning their love, but by demanding my freedom. The story of Elias Vance, the dutiful son, was over. The story of Eli Vance, the independent artist, had just begun. The departure from the Vance estate wasn't just a physical separation, it was an emotional shearing. I had walked away from the gilded cage, and the massive financial payout was already securely in my new, private account. The week that followed was spent not celebrating, but in the quiet, meticulous work of untangling my life. The immediate resolution of the secondary conflict, the Horizon Shores deal and the associated risks, came through my lawyer, Richard Cole. He called a few days after my resignation, his tone heavy with the implication of the mess I had left behind. "The directors are in chaos, Elias. Victoria and Caroline are desperately trying to cover the financial shortfall from your payout, and they've realized how much trouble they're in with Avery Sinclair," Richard informed me. "The high-interest loan penalties are kicking in because they delayed the regulatory checks you normally handled. Sinclair is already leveraging the failure to meet the first deadline. They're facing immediate, serious financial distress." I felt a surge of cold, professional satisfaction, not malice. My resignation hadn't just secured my freedom, it had triggered the inevitable consequence of their recklessness. They were now experiencing the full, terrifying risk that I had spent years mitigating. "What about the company's fate?" I asked, focusing on the broader resolution. "Vance Holdings will survive, but it will be unrecognizable. They'll have to sell off assets to stay afloat, and Victoria's reputation as the untouchable matriarch is irrevocably damaged among the directors. She's being forced to delegate, not dominate. The financial monster they created is now feeding on them." The financial subplot was tied up. The business wouldn't collapse entirely, but it would be painfully cut down to size. This reinforced the theme clarification. My sacrifice was unnecessary. The The structure was fundamentally flawed and needed to be dismantled. My own adjustment was to leave New England entirely for a while. I rented a small, nondescript apartment in Brooklyn, New York, a vibrant, chaotic place that was the antithesis of the cold, ordered silence of the Vance estate. The apartment was small, noisy, and perfect. I set up a makeshift darkroom and bought all new, professional equipment. The sensory contrast was profound. The smell of fresh print paper, chemical developer, and city exhaust was replacing the scent of mahogany and antique wax. I sat on my fire escape one evening, looking at the chaotic, beautiful city lights. For 2 decades, I had been terrified of this kind of uncertainty. Now it felt like oxygen. The emotional resonance of the betrayal had faded into acceptance. The pain wasn't that they left me. The pain was that I let their opinion of me define my entire existence. My transformation was complete. I was no longer the son seeking approval. I was the artist seeking light. The true closure came a week later, with a controlled, brief call from my mother, Victoria. She didn't use her personal phone. She used a secured corporate line. "Elias, the firm has survived the immediate liquidity crisis, but we've had to make severe asset cuts," she began, her dialogue showing change. Her voice was measured, subdued, lacking its usual tyrannical pitch. "I need to know if you're planning any future legal actions regarding the Horizon Shores disclosures." I knew she was terrified that I still held the power to destroy her reputation completely. "No, Mother," I replied calmly. "I filed for my resignation and my payout. That transaction is complete. I am not interested in the affairs of Vance Holdings." A heavy pause followed. She wasn't used to hearing no without an attached argument. Then, she said something I never expected, a concession that was perhaps the closest she could come to an apology. "You played the hand perfectly, Elias. You exposed the weak link and maximized the return. Your father would have admired your ruthlessness." It was still framed in business terms, but I finally realized I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need her to see me as the son. I needed her to respect the man who walked away. "Thank you, Mother. You taught me the value of leverage," I said. My dialogue showed reconciliation not of the family, but of our dynamic. "I wish you luck in restructuring the firm. I will not be in contact unless it is absolutely necessary for legal matters." I hung up, gently placing the corporate phone back on the desk. The silence in my little Brooklyn apartment was a sanctuary. I had set a firm, definitive boundary. The secondary conflict of my relationships with the family wasn't resolved through forgiveness. It was resolved through distance and definitive action. They were paying the price of their choices, and I was finally pursuing the truth of mine. I was ready for the next chapter of my life, armed with the financial freedom I earned and the artistic hunger I had rediscovered. It took 10 months, a mountain of student debt that I willingly created, despite the massive settlement, and a complete change of scenery for me to realize that the most beautiful view in the world is the one you earn yourself. The date was September 12th, and I was standing in a brightly lit, bustling gallery in downtown Manhattan. The air was thick with the scent of cheap wine, expensive perfume, and the faint, sweet smell of fresh print paper. This was my first solo exhibition, aptly titled The Gilded Cage, a study in architecture and isolation. I was no longer Elias Vance, COO. I was Eli Thorne, the photographer. The transformation was absolute. Gone were the tailored suits and the forced posture of corporate authority. My days were now governed by the unpredictable demands of light, shadow, and artistic integrity, not quarterly reports. The dead art that Marcus Chun had criticized was alive again, fueled by the raw, liberating fury of my betrayal. I finally had the hunger, the desperate need to capture the truth, not just the technical perfection. The main focus of the gallery was the series I had shot at the Vance estate right after Thanksgiving, the cold, symmetrical beauty of the architecture juxtaposed with the chaos of the internal landscape. People didn't see granite, they saw entrapment. They didn't see the pool, they saw a dark, controlled reflection. Marcus Chin was there, sipping a drink, a proud, satisfied look on his face. He walked up to me, nodding toward a large print of the estate's iron gate, photographed from the outside looking in. "That's the shot, Eli," he said, his voice low. "The old you would have cleaned up that light flare. The new you lets it blind the viewer. That's the passion I was looking for. That's the difference between a technician and an artist." "I had to lose everything to find the light, Marcus," I admitted. "I realized my passion wasn't dead. It was just suffocated by the obligation. The sight of my work hanging on the wall, my true, painful, glorious expression, brought a profound emotional satisfaction. The resolution wasn't just financial freedom, it was the final, public validation of my self-worth." The gallery itself became the final stage for the theme reinforced, the importance of setting boundaries and the courage to establish a life based on authenticity. The biggest reminder of my past came when I saw a familiar face near the entrance, Victoria Vance. She was alone, dressed in an impeccably tailored black suit, carrying a small, discreet portfolio case. She stood facing the gallery wall, looking at the entire series of my work, the photographs of her house. She finally approached me. The tension was present, but it was fundamentally different. It wasn't the high-stakes, life-or-death corporate tension. It was the quiet, respectful tension between two independent adults. "It's a powerful exhibit, Elias," she said, using my full name, a rarity. Her face was lined with a weariness I had never seen before. "Thank you, Mother. I appreciate you coming," I replied, matching her formality. Her dialogue showing reconciliation and change was measured, but undeniable. "I didn't come to apologize. I came because I saw the reviews. You've done what you needed to do. But I need to tell you about Horizon Shores. Sinclair has initiated foreclosure proceedings. Caroline is distraught. The directors are meeting next week to discuss a full bankruptcy filing." My heart remained steady. I felt no triumph, only a detached sadness for the inevitable. "I warned you, Mother. You chose recklessness over stability," I stated. "I know," she conceded, the single word carrying the weight of a decade of corporate failure. "I risked everything for the illusion of perpetual growth. You were the only one who saw the risk, and I punished you for it. I miscalculated your compliance, and I miscalculated Sinclair." She reached into her case and pulled out a simple, sealed envelope, not the gold crest of the estate, but plain, white stationery. "This is an invitation to Thanksgiving this year. Just the three of us. No seating charts, no caterers, no business. Just dinner," she said, her eyes pleading only slightly. "And I want you to know, Elias, the money you took, you earned it. You should have been paid that 10 years ago." This final concession, the acknowledgement of the injustice and the offer of a new, boundary-defined relationship, was the true end of the conflict. "I appreciate the invitation, Mother," I responded, taking the envelope but not opening it. I hadn't opened her previous note on Thanksgiving, and I wouldn't open this one now. "I have plans that week. But thank you for defining a new boundary. Perhaps we can schedule a quiet lunch later in the year. If you can respect my schedule." I used her own language, schedule, to assert my new control. She nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. She understood. The relationship was no longer based on her demands.